get things started. So, a few logistical items. We've got the next hour booked. John and I don't have an hour of content. We saved a lot of time for Q&A questions at the end, or any open topics that folks might have. As we go along, you'll see there's a Q&A within Zoom. Feel free to put any questions there. We also have webinar chat enabled, so feel free to discuss amongst yourselves or ask questions there. We'll try to keep up as we go, but if we miss anything, we'll go back at the end, right? See any unanswered questions, cover those. So today, again, thank you everyone for joining us. Depending on where you're at, I see a lot of experienced Fingerprint users. I see a lot of names where Fingerprint might be new to y'all. So today we're just going to cover a quick high-level overview of Fingerprint. We've got a few slides. We won't PowerPoint you to death, I promise. We'll just kind of share what the industry's going through, experiencing, some of the customers we worked with, what they're doing with Fingerprint, and then John will take us through a demo of the product itself, right? So you can all quickly see how it works. And let's jump straight to introductions. So my name is Dewey Tran, head of global sales here at Fingerprint. Been at the company for a couple of years, so I get the joy of working with customers, partners all around the globe, and um, a huge myriad of different business cases, use cases, especially in the time that I've been here. Customers and folks like you all continue to find new, interesting use cases for Fingerprint. So excited to share that with you today.
And hello, everyone. This is John George. I lead the solutions engineering team here at Fingerprint. Been with the company for a little less than 2 years. But yeah, like Dewey said, we have seen varied types of customers and partners that we work with, different kinds of use cases that we solve for them. So happy to go over that overview today with you all. And again, thanks for attending.
Awesome. I'm based out of Seattle. John here's based out of Dallas, Texas. We're a fully remote company, so we've got teams on I think 4 different continents, perhaps 5 now. So plenty of folks to help. If anyone has questions, you have my email, John's email down below. But of course, we'll get you to the right folks after the webinar. All right, so here's a quick agenda. We'll just quickly go through what device identification is. Why is it difficult? What is the benefit of an accurate ID? There's a lot of different solution sets out there, varying levels of accuracy. We'll kind of take through why we think high accuracy is really critical. Of course, we'll go through the product demo, and then we'll share some outcomes and results, like actual real world results, which is what actually matters, right? So the first one, device identification is difficult, and it's getting more difficult. So previously, if we look not too long ago, cookies, local storage, IP address were very reliable, right? If I had those signals, I could accurately identify returning visitor. Um, Today, there's so many more tools that obfuscate those things, right? Makes it challenging. So users can conceal their identity more often. For a lot of legitimate users, like incognito browsing, that immediately wipes cookies and removes a lot of the signals that folks would typically expect. Today, VPNs and private relay, like very easy to access. Within probably 2 minutes, I could get a VPN brand new, signed up, pay with Apple Pay, and it's up and live, right? And then the last one is privacy and cookie blocking with browser settings. Browsers are moving, uh, there's like cookie Armageddon. You might have heard that term, but very much so cookies, especially third-party cookies, we're moving away from. So it's a lot easier, which is a benefit for the industry, I think, for individuals to conceal their identity, right? There's high level of privacy, and we think that's critical here too. The second one, for businesses that did figure it out, it's just the level of change within browsers, different platforms. So I'm talking iOS, Android, Windows, Mac. There's just changes within the different signals that we previously used that were stable. They're changing so often that it actually is very cumbersome for a business to keep up with those changes, right? And if they create machine learning, different algorithms, they have to continue to maintain and update those so that you're accurately identifying people. So some of the challenges there, as we mentioned, third-party cookie deprecation, that's coming up. We're seeing that on all the major browser platforms. There's restricted access to mobile devices, right? On mobile, if you have an app that requests and gets access to device level identifiers, you could probably accurately identify the device. The challenge is a lot of people don't accept that, or it's more friction for your user base, and it's not ideal. And then the last one is changes to actual user agent signals. That's what I covered there. So many signals are changing. It's difficult to keep up and make sure, are my signals still viable? Are they still accurate? And then the last one is from a regulatory and security requirements perspective, very complex world we live in, right? So if your business is in Europe, you'll have to manage GDPR. There's going to be California, and we're seeing a lot of different other jurisdictions, both in the U.S. and abroad, away from the Americas and Europe. We're seeing a lot of new compliance regulatory concerns to think about. So our business works with them a lot. We work with a lot of legal teams to address and understand how we can operate and still be compliant. So how do customers benefit? There's three buckets of use cases that we see customer different projects fall into. When we look at the actual use case itself, there's probably a couple dozen, but they fall into these three buckets. So the first one is to prevent fraud, right? So if I can catch a sophisticated fraudster, I can prevent them from these automated threats. So this is account takeover, payment fraud, sign up fraud, account sharing. There's a much longer list, but think about that. So someone comes to my web property, they do something, they come back, I can detect that, prevent them, right? And high accuracy allows me to do that consistently over and over again. The second one is improving UX. So if I can accurately identify someone and they're a trusted user, how do I get them through a better customer flow? A very common use case, we work with large banks. If I come back, I do a tran, I got to log into my bank account. We recognize it's my mobile device or my computer. We should skip two factors, skip all the what street did you live on in 2012? We can skip the KYC components if it's already a verified person, right? So there's two benefits there. For the end user, you get to streamline that experience. For the business, you get to save on costs of all the downstream payments, right? If you're doing SMS or different forms of OTP, you get to save on those transactional costs. The third one is to understand better user insights. So we work with, for example, e-commerce businesses, and they're doing marketing attribution. Which channel did my user actually come from? Did they come from Instagram? Was it a referral code? Did they just Google our website? And that gives businesses more information to understand how they make their investments, right? So these are the three major buckets that we found. I bet looking at history here, you all will continue to find more use cases, and maybe we'll have larger buckets moving forward. But today it's to prevent fraud, improve the user experience, and just gain user insights. So how does that actually work, right? So what we do, we only do one thing and one thing only. We try to identify a device or a browser, right? And we call it a visitor ID down below. You can see it starts with QYD. That's a unique string. It doesn't say this is Dewey Tran, this is where he lives. It doesn't do that. It just says here's this device, Dewey's iPhone, except it doesn't know Dewey's iPhone. It just says here's an iPhone and here's his visitor ID. And how we do that is we use a lot of things that are available via open API. So here's a subset of the type of signals that we collect, right? So from a device, we'll capture audio settings, CPU, OS properties, things that are readily accessible. And then we also capture some network signals as well because there's a server side call. Now, so any of you could do this, right? All these signals are publicly available. You could build a tool to collect these signals and create your own visitor IDs. So the secret sauce is how do you make this strict enough so that the visitor ID doesn't change, right? Because you want that visitor ID to be very long lived. We go for a year plus. That's our goal. But you want it flexible, right? Because phones do change every day. If I install a new app, if I update my operating system, I travel, now I have a different time zone. How do you create the correct balancing weights of the signals so that you're always consistent in your visitor ID? And so that's what we built the company around. We collect numerous signals, and we're constantly adjusting and tweaking to ensure that we allow flexibility, but we're not getting false positives. We're not getting false negatives. That's just a quick high level. Let me check the chat. I don't see any questions yet. Next part, we'll move into a quick product demo. John, let's show everyone how it works.
Sure. Thank you, Dewey. Let me quickly share my screen here. Awesome. So before we start with the big demo, I want to give you an opportunity to try out Fingerprint at your end, right? So what you can do is you can go to fingerprint.com/demo and look at the service in action. And so here I have that page open, and what you're looking at is my visitor ID, the ID that Dewey was referring to. It Just to try this out, you can maybe open an incognito window and see if this visitor ID persists. That will prove two different things. One is, a end customer or a fraudster cannot change their visitor ID by just opening an incognito window. It will also show you how we don't rely on cookies for that identification. You can also try enabling a VPN and see if this visitor ID changes. So that will also show that we rely very less on things like IP address, which is very transient and which changes quite a bit in this new world. Now, how do we integrate? Now, if you are part of like a product or an engineering team, you'll be interested to see how easy it is to use Fingerprint, integrate it with your web or mobile properties, and then start using it, right? So we have a very developer-friendly documentation here. So you can go to dev.fingerprint.com, and it will give you everything that you need to know to get started with using Fingerprint. And here you have the 7 or 8 lines of code, JavaScript code that will get the JavaScript agent or the Fingerprint JavaScript agent, put it onto your web application, and then whenever you need that visitor ID that we were referring to, you just make that get call. So as soon as you make a get call, you get that visitor ID, and then you can pass it to your downstream decision engines. Now, this could be, let's say, you want to make sure that this is John logging in from a known device. So when John puts his username password, you take that username password along with this visitor ID, push it to your backend systems, and your backend decision engine will look at username password, see that matches, and then look at that visitor ID and see if John has logged in from this visitor ID before. So then if that is true, if that's the case, you pass a success back to your front end and you push John into his account. If that is not true, what you would want to verify at that point is if, is this John really coming in from a different device, or is someone else pretending to be John, right? So passively in the backend, what you're doing is you're doing an MFA, a multi-factor authentication. You're verifying that John is using a known device. And if not, then you can use that as a place to push up that authentication and show maybe an OTP screen at that point. Because our system is so accurate, and about 99.5% is our accuracy, because it's so accurate, there will be very few instances where John, coming from the same device, will still see an OTP screen. Almost never John will see that OTP screen if he continuously uses that same device. Now, let's move on to the demo here. Imagine we have an e-learning website. And so there are a couple of things in this e-learning website. One is let's say we provide some sort of a benefit for new users. Let's say they can log in and view maybe 3 or 4 different courses. And then after that, you would start charging your end customers. In that case, a usual fraud that you would see in a scenario like this is where people would use up their free quota and then go and create another account. And that another account is usually, it's as easy as opening an incognito window, giving a new email address, and you're good to go. You get access to that new account. Very similar to a problem that Dropbox was facing, right? So they gave out those trials, and people were creating multiple trials to avail that unlimited storage that they were providing. So let's see how you can use Fingerprint to prevent multi-account fraud. So in this case, I am resetting the demo here. I'm going to my sign up screen, putting my details. And since this is the first time I'm creating an account, I will be let in, right? So the account gets created, and now I am in my account screen. Now let's see what happens when I go incognito. So I open my incognito window, and let me try and create another account here. So in this case, I'll give a very different email address and a different password. And let's say the number of times we allow a new user to create an account is only 1. So one user can have only 1 account for the ease of this demo. So now when I try and create this account, what happens is in the backend, the decision engine looks at the visitor ID and says, this visitor ID already had an account, right? So now, and that limit is 1. So they have already reached their limit. I would not let this visitor ID create any more accounts. And this can vary for you. In your business, it could be 5, right? In some regions, there's a lot of device sharing happening. So it could be 5 or 6 or 10, depending on what you would allow from that standpoint. So this is an example where you can use that very stable, very accurate visitor ID across incognito modes, across VPN, to still enforce some of those rules that you have to prevent abusers from abusing those.
We've
Now
got a
let's,
question here. We've got a
sure,
question here, John,
yeah, good.
from Hassan. In case
Mhm.
John has lost the device, is there a way to revoke the device?
Absolutely. And so then, since this visitor ID now becomes part of a device profile in your databases, you can manage it however you want to. For example, in this example that Dewey mentioned, where you want your end customers to give this flexibility of revoking a device. Let's say the device is lost and they want to revoke that device. They can go to their account, remove that device, and in your backend, you can remove that visitor ID that is tagged with that account. And in some cases, you can also use that as a flag, as a flagging mechanism. Let's say that the end user said, okay, this device is stolen, right? At that point, you can maybe flag that device ID as a stolen device. And then maybe if there are new accounts coming from that device, you can now start applying more authentication levels and security levels to that specific flow.
And there's, let's see here, a couple questions. We'll jump back. Ali had a question before. I think this is when we were discussing the different signals.
Mhm.
In regards to the visitor ID, can you tell exactly the type of device and network the device is on? An example, would you know it's an iPhone on Verizon's network using 5G?
So yeah, to answer that question, yes, we would know that this is an iPhone, but we would from a service provider standpoint, we won't have that information for you. So what the information that you get, and let me quickly actually share that, so you can look at the kind of information we return. Go to our extended result. So what you're looking at here is the default response. So the default response that comes client side will usually have that visitor ID, the ID that we were talking about, a confidence score, and some information from our network. But if you opt for an extended result, that's when we can give you more information about that customer. For example, device information, we can give browser information, we can give a geolocation based on the IP address that we received from that device. So some more extra information now that can now be channeled into your decision engine to make more informed decisions.
I will paste that. I'll paste that in the chat here in a moment. There's one more question. Is it possible to record the IP address used at the time that the fingerprint touched an account?
Absolutely. And since this is an API-based solution, so this is on demand, right? So when that client-side API is called, our servers crunch those and give you a response back, those signals and give a response back. And this is the response that you're looking at. So you can store this response as an instance of when you interacted with this end user. And that will have the IP address associated with that user at that time, the visitor ID, and all that information that we return with. We also have a server API. So if you have the visitor ID, you can use the server API to get historical uh, touch points of this customer up to 90 days. And that 90 days is variable, and we can set that up for you. But you can get historical information about that visitor ID using that server API.
Thanks, Sean. I think we're
Awesome.
good to go back to the demo. Those are all the questions
Awesome.
we had.
All right. So now let's look at a scenario where we talked about how we can use Fingerprint to prevent end customers or fraudsters from creating multiple accounts and abusing those trials or the coupons that you give out. Now, let's say we want to make sure that as part of the login flow, we have a second level of verification being done, right? So now let me log out. And since this is a known device, this is the device from which John actually registered. You already have this visitor ID associated with John. So every time John logs in, this is accounted as a good flow, as a known device flow, and you can prevent or stop any further authentication process like an OTP or an MFA. But let's imagine someone else got John's username password and they're trying to log in, right? So in this scenario, what you would do is in the backend. Now let's put uh, John's account details here and let's try and log in. Now you can see that in the backend, since that visitor ID is a key part of that login flow, and that is what you use as that second level of authentication, since there is a mismatch now, you are now asking that end customer to for that additional verification. This could be an OTP screen and an SMS based OTP or an email based OTP. And what you're now doing is intelligently popping the screen, and not every time. Let's say a cookie gets deleted and you pop the screen. What if you have a device identification system based on cookies or IP addresses? This would be a very common thing that would pop up and unintentionally cause friction for your good users. But if you use something like Fingerprint, which persists for a long time and which is stable across VPNs and across cookie deletions, you can now intelligently pop up the screen only when needed. So this is another use case that we help a lot of customers with. Now, let's say you have a system where people log in, but then there are a lot of abuses that log in and do some bad transactions on your platform. So let's say John is trying to use a stolen credit card, right? He logged in as a good user. This is a known user, but now the first time he's trying to check out something, he's actually using a stolen credit card. So in this case, I am putting in my details here, the stolen credit card number. And he goes ahead and submits it. So not Fingerprint, but one of your systems, which basically monitors these payments that are going through, alerts you that John actually used a stolen credit card. Now, what you would do at that point is you would flag this device up and then say, okay, since John has used a stolen device, John's account should be suspended till we are able to clarify that. So let's say John logs out and he is now again logging in to his account. Now, since the device ID matches with one of those flagged devices, you are popping up the screen that says that his account is suspended. Now, this is also true if he is logging in from an incognito window. So even let's say John sees the screen and says, okay, let me try incognito. Let's see if that would let me through. In this case, even then, you can see that the account is suspended. Now, he can also try and create a new account just to get rid of the screen. He would still be flagged because that device ID will persist across all those accounts. So these are some of the common use cases from a fraud perspective that we help our customers prevent and also tackle during that customer journey that they have.
Awesome. Thanks, John. There's a few more questions that have come
Great.
in.
Mm-hmm.
I saw Esteban, you raised your hand. If you have a question, if you could just type it in the chat, that would be helpful, but happy to help there. Okay, so question from Hassan. Another case where a public computer is being used in a school library. There's multiple students accessing from a school network. With that understanding, the IP is not factored in the fingerprint. I'm not sure what the question is. I think Hassan was just bringing up that case. We can talk about that. So how would fingerprint be used on a public workstation like that?
Sure. Yeah. So what we have seen customers do is when you have a good chunk of your traffic have these cases where they have multiple devices or one device being shared among multiple accounts, which is what the case would be in a publicly shared system. What they would do is they would always use or put that device into like a list of devices which is used by a lot of different accounts, and then make a choice on what kind of authentication you want to perform there. And this could be anywhere from being extremely restrictive, where you're popping up an OTP screen for any access from that specific device, or it could be a scaled down mechanism where you're asking for like a token, or it could be just a key that could be asked at that point. So so you would know that these devices are accessed by good accounts, but it's a commonly used or a shared device, and then you can use that information to change your decision engine on what kind of step-up authentication you would need to do at that.
Awesome. Okay, question from Harris. If a member decides to upload or download any type of documents, can device fingerprint be used to collect the true geolocation?
Sure. So the geolocation that we provide, the geolocation service we provide, is kind of like an add-on, right? So the main thing that we provide, or the main service that we provide, is device identification. Geolocation is an added feature, and the geolocation that we derive is actually from the IP address, not from the real device. Because doing that from the real device using GPS or some other mechanism would require us to ask permission or add more screens, or consent screens to that flow. Because we don't do that, and we don't want our customers doing that, we are using IP address to get that geolocation information. So there are two signals that we give back, right? We give that geolocation information. We also give you a VPN usage information. So what that allows you to do is, if that VPN usage information is set to false, we did not detect a VPN usage, you can trust the geolocation that is being provided to some extent, right? And there's also an accuracy radius in that. So in some regions, that accuracy radius might be small. In some regions, it could be wider. But you can still trust that. But then if we give a response back that says that the VPN was actually used in this case, at that point, you probably won't be able to trust the location that we provide, right? Because it's IP based, and VPN could change that IP and could get a different location based on that. So those are some of the constraints around using that geolocation. I would not consider geolocation to be as accurate, but it's something still that you can use as part of your decision.
Awesome. The next two questions I'm gonna hold, because they're actually the next segment of this presentation. So we will address this in just a moment. So back to you, John, if there's anything else on the demo front.
That's it from my side, Dewey. So if you want to share the next slide, we can
Yeah.
go.
Absolutely. So, as John mentioned, when this business was started, the company was started, we were very focused on browser identification, moved into mobile identification. And then the next two questions that came, I'll just read them right now. The questions that were in the chat is, are you working on ways to identify users based on other information other than their device to prevent fraudsters from just using multiple or public devices? And then a follow-on question was, is this method of fingerprinting effective against a virtual machine? I love these two questions. We were getting, I don't know, John, hundreds of these while we were going out to market, talking with different folks. And so that's a natural segue to where the company's going next. So we developed something called Smart Signals, a list of additional signals to empower businesses, users like yourself, to get more advanced techniques so you can make better decisions. So we'll cover that right now.
Yeah, so
Okay.
like Dewey mentioned, we got really good at identifying devices. And as part of getting really good at identifying real user devices, we also had to get really good at identifying bots, and identifying tampered devices, and identifying other things that might show some intent or malicious intent from that end user. So that's when, once we identified those areas and those signals, we thought, okay, this might be a good thing for our end customers to use, because this can actually directly flow into their systems, and along with identifying the device, they can also identify that intent from that end user. And so this is the list of smart signals that we recently released. So like I said, identifying and giving an ID to a real user makes us also really good at identifying bots. So bot detection, browser bot detection, was one of the things that we recently released as part of the response. Incognito detection. So again, some extra signals that we pass to our customers to make a decision. So let's say it's a banking application, and you don't want your end customers to be on incognito, or maybe on incognito you want to step up the authentication. You can use that signal that we provide into your decision engine. IP geolocation, we talked about it. It's an IP-based geolocation, along with VPN detection, which is the next one on that list. Will give you a good idea about where this customer could be based out of. Browser tamper detection, again, giving you that intent, a malicious intent from the end customer side. And not always it could be malicious, but this gives you a chance to step up the authentication, right? So browser tampering detection is when someone is trying to change the way that browser looks and shows to your application, right? So you can get some idea of what kind of changes have been made on that browser. IP block list matching, again, if this IP that we got from that end device falls in a database of blocklisted or blacklisted IP addresses, we can give you that information. And that information, along with some of the other things like tamper detection and bot detection, can give you a good idea of the intent, or maybe block IP access or requests coming from a specific group of IP addresses. Privacy aware settings. Now, there are a lot of browsers like Tor or Brave that have a lot of changes that you can do on the browser to ensure privacy. And so if you're a banking application, you want to make sure you step up the authentication and make sure these are not fraudsters trying to use these privacy aware browsers to actually commit any fraud. You can use that as a signal to step up authentication. Now, we started as an open source solution, and our open source used to give a lot of signals that we collected. And we have a lot of customers who build their decision engine based on those signals. So if you're a customer or a company that is already using our open source, the raw device attributes is that list of signals that we used to expose as part of our open source offering. So for you, the transition will be easy now. You don't have to change your decision engines to accommodate the new pro version, but you can still continue to use those signals. Android emulation and tamper detection, again, a big thing for our customers, and a big ask that we always used to get was, on Android, can we get some sort of a signal from you where we can make a decision on if we need to trust this platform or not? So two things that came up were, is this device rooted? Is this device running in an emulated environment? Those are the two cases where you absolutely don't want your application to even run or maybe initialize. So in that case, we can give you that information. And so when the application is initializing, you can call us, get that information, and make a decision if you want to even initialize on this platform. So just to make sure that you're running your application only on trusted platforms. Virtual machine detection, again, the question that was asked before, that is a signal that we provide. So if the device is running or the browser is running within a virtual machine or a simulated environment, we will be able to give you that information. Cloned app detection is something that is new, where we have seen a lot of multi-account abusers creating these cloned applications to create multiple accounts. So we can tell you if this request for fingerprinting is actually coming from a cloned device, and we can cloned application, and we can give you that information. Jailbroken and FRIDA detection on iOS, again, something that we recently released. Similar to Android emulator and tamper detection, we are able to give you similar information on the iOS side too. If this, that is, if this platform could be trusted, do you want to initialize your application or run the application or run some high value transactions on this device?
There's
Factory
a question
reset
here,
detection.
John.
Sure.
What does it mean when a device has been jailbroken?
Yeah, so jailbroken is when the end user is able to get access to the platform layer of that device. What that means is that the end user is now able to see all the different data and even change that data that flows between different layers of your platform, of your mobile platform. And so what that, from a fraudster's perspective, it's a very good thing, because they can look at the data, they can also change that data. So when that data comes and hits your servers, it's already spoofed, it's already tampered, and you would make your decision or approve or deny a transaction based on that. So it is really critical for your application to detect that early on and stop requests or transactions coming from a jailbroken or a rooted device. Awesome. Yeah, that's so factory reset detection, the last one in this list. Again, a request that we have been constantly getting from our customers. Can we get a timestamp of when this device was last factory reset? So for example, you have a high value transaction coming from a device that was factory reset 5 minutes back. Could be someone who is factory resetting their device and running these scripts that is generating this high value transaction, and which might end up in chargebacks, right? So you can now use that factory reset detection service that we provide to step up authentication at that point, or maybe deny transactions at that point, or maybe route them to a customer service department. So again, a list of additional signals that we provide along with the signals that we already used to from an identification perspective to enable your decision engines to make more informed decisions. That is the whole idea behind these smart signals.
Yeah. What we've seen in practice is that for these signals standalone by themselves, we might not necessarily make decisions, right? I might not actually block a user if they're using a VPN. Could be a good VPN, right? But when we couple that with the visitor ID, so you take your visitor ID, you take these smart signals to see the user behavior. If you can associate that with like a high risk transaction or a high risk action, that gives you more information to say, yeah, we should step up. We should just verify, make sure this is actually John George, and we should let him transfer money from one bank account to another. So that's our 2 cents of what we've kind of seen in practice, how it works in the wild. Some questions here. Would users on the same device, but possibly using different VPNs, show up as separate visitor IDs? I can answer that one. So the goal there for us, we would show the same visitor ID. However, we would have VPN detection, that flag, that would be marked positive, right? So you would say, here's this visitor ID, but there's a VPN detected. So we show that. Next question here. Does Fingerprint account for users using different devices on the same network? For example, a user who is not signing in, accessing a website from their desktop, then moving to their mobile device to access the same site. Say you wanted to display personalized content to this user no matter what device they are using, they're not signed in. Can Fingerprint assist with that? This is interesting. Great question. We come across this quite a bit. So we made an architecture decision early on, right? Of do you go across platforms? So for Dewey Tran, do I assign a visitor ID between his MacBook, his iPhone, his PC, right? And a lot of businesses will do that. And we made the decision not to. And the give and take is if you go across platform, your accuracy drops, right? Because you're trying to match users across without any user interaction. So what we elected to do was go for high accuracy, but that visitor ID would not translate across platforms. So what our customers do is there's an event on their side. We'll cover Dropbox in a moment as an example, but there's an event on the customer side where they do know the visitor, right? So if there is a sign in or you ask something that is able to identify the user. So then on your side, you can build a list, a profile of the visitor IDs associated with that individual or that person, right? And that's how you would personalize. That's how you would improve that experience. If there's not a sign-in mechanism or some unique identification mechanism built in, that would be very challenging. We don't do that, right? We don't match one device to another. Is a question: are these available via SDK or also or with only JavaScript? John, I'll let you take that one.
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, on the web application side, it is a JavaScript agent that you can deploy now. If you yourself create these SDKs that you give out to your customers, this JavaScript can be embedded in that SDK, right? So then, as part of your flow that happens when that SDK is invoked, you can invoke this JavaScript. So it won't. So that's why we chose that JavaScript route, because it's very easy and flexible, and you can bundle it as an SDK yourself on your side. But our offering from our side is that JavaScript. For mobile platforms, we do have SDKs that you can embed into your application. The flow looks almost the same, where you have the load and the get method, but it is an SDK on the mobile platforms.
Right. Next question: how many false positives, if any, do you have on any of the additional smart signals?
Good question. That is something that we are currently looking into and trying to measure. On the identification side, like we mentioned, it's about 99.5% accurate. So the error rate, false positives and false negatives, is about 0.5%. We are now in the process of doing that for some of the smart signals that we provide, for example, bot detection and tamper detection. We don't have those numbers published yet, but that is something that we are working on. And we have seen, at least from the POCs and the partnerships that we have with our customers, that it is very highly accurate. Just to be completely transparent, if you compare a 10-year-old bot detection product, it might not be apples to apples there, but we are still getting there. But again, like Dewey mentioned, the value is when you have the identification and the smart signals together, that the smart signals itself might be less accurate, but when you put it together, that accuracy increases because of how accurate the identification solution is.
Next question, John. Overall, signals how many signals are collected to attain the high level accuracy?
Sure, yeah. And we don't have like a number, mainly because it varies from platform to platform. Within the browsers, on the web application side, we collect about 120 odd signals. Now, again, that varies from Chrome browser to Safari to Brave, but that's kind of the range we have. On the device side, we collect less signals, mainly because we get more stronger signals and more unique signals from mobile platforms, but it's less than 100 signals that we collect on the mobile platform side.
Awesome. Thank you, John. All right, I'll love to share a couple customer stories. It's very cool to share the tech and in a lab how it works, but let's share some actual evidence. So we've mentioned this a couple of times. Dropbox, so technology company dealing with online storage, they were having some challenges. There's a couple things going on. So at Dropbox, if you sign up, you can create a free account, get some free storage. The problem was it was really hard for them to pinpoint exactly when people would make multiple accounts, right? So let's say an account gives you 10 gigs of online storage, no big deal. If I have a million users that get 10 free gigs, that turns into a dollar line item, right? When I'm paying for computing costs. So that was use case number one. Use case two, Dropbox, as you can imagine, they serve a lot of enterprise businesses. They're protecting valuable data, right? Confidential information. So if there was ever an attack or they were able to get into accounts they shouldn't have, now you have non-public information in the hands of who knows, right? So, they treat security very seriously. They have very large teams that focus on this. But when we spoke to Dropbox, they were basically saying, how can you further improve the mechanisms that we have, right? So what they were looking to do is use Fingerprint at login to match with the credentials, right? So now you can detect account takeover. If I see a visitor ID that tries to log in with 5 sets of different credentials, that's not normal user behavior, right? Number two, for bad actors, if I see one visitor ID that's doing multiple signups trying to create accounts, I block that so they can reduce that free tier abuse. And then the third one was for my good users. If John George comes back and he's a paid Dropbox user and we recognize that device, it's trusted. Let's get him right back into his account quickly. Let's not ask for MFA, do a CAPTCHA, a number of different checks. So partnerships so far, they prevented, 3 large scale attacks. I won't share the dollar value, of course, but very significant. Account takeover has decreased by 80%. They're able to stop it as soon as they identify that visitor ID. And then for customers, the number of customers that require an MFA step up have drastically reduced, right? So they're able to get customers right into the product that they want. Another example I'll share, Jumia, they're a publicly traded company based in Africa. They're a marketplace. They process a lot of transactions. Uh, Jumia had an interesting use case where in that market, there's a lot of SMS OTP, right? And every time there's an OTP request, that costs Jumia money. What they actually found out was there was some bad actors that were essentially boosting the number of OTPs. They would go to Jumia, go trigger the OTP, and there's some downstream, they got some commission or something that got them paid when there was more OTP requests. So using Fingerprint, they were able to determine, okay, if it's a bot or if it's a visitor ID that I've seen that triggers OTP intentionally quite a bit, I'll just block them and not trigger the OTP, right? So what they did was they now limit the number of verification requests that a single user can trigger. Um, so that gives them the ability to not only identify those users, but block them. right, to prevent those downstream costs. Um, and now they've added some things where they can delay SMS verification if they detect a bad user, right? So they don't flat out block them. They just add a lot of friction that disincentivizes them to try to do a device reset or to come back and keep doing SMS requests. Let's see if there's any questions. Uh, we must disclose the details of the data we track to our customers. What type of disclosure is necessary according to GDPR, CCPA when we implement fingerprinting? This is a great question. We come up with this a lot. So the net of it is it'll be up to your attorneys and your legal teams to determine what is the appropriate method. So I'm not an attorney. This is not legal advice, but there are legitimate use cases, carve outs in GDPR and CCPA. So in general, if it's on a fraud type use case, I'm protecting account takeover. I'm preventing bad actors from gaining access to something. For those use cases, there are carve outs, and usually businesses don't have to disclose that because it's a defensive measure. And again, rely on your attorneys to read and understand those regulations. If it's for uh, if it's for improving user experience, if it's for understanding better user insights, typically you will have to get consent, right? It follows the same track as you would cookies. This is what we collect. This is what we do with the data. Here's the form. Please accept, reject, right? So that's the approach I would suggest. But again, rely on your attorneys or lawyers to determine what's the correct approach for your business.
One thing I wanted to add there was from a signal collection perspective, we talked about the 120 odd signals that we collect. We don't collect any PII information, right? We are not asking the user or collecting the users like form fill data, like for first name, last name, email address. None of that information comes to us, or we don't collect that. The signals that we are talking about here are benign signals that we get from the browser. Now, having said that, IP address, for example, is could be considered PII in some regions, specifically in GDPR, where the restrictions that Dewey mentioned would apply for non-fraud related use cases.
Let me check the chat one more time. I don't see any questions in chat or on the Q&A. Thank you very much, everyone, for your time. We really appreciate it. We took up 50 minutes, so happy to give you 10 minutes back. But yeah, as you can tell, Fingerprint started on a mission to do one thing, right? Was identify devices, browsers, prevent fraud. And since then, customers have come up with a lot of feedback, new mechanisms, new ways fraudsters are circumventing the protection. So we're always listening to our customers' feedback to just the general community, try to make our service better and create more value. So uh, I'm sure you'll be hearing from, you'll likely get an email from our team with the recording of this webinar. If any additional questions come up, you see my email right there, Dewey@fingerprint.com. John's is john.george@fingerprint.com. We'd be happy to connect with you, kind of understand what you're working on, what you're curious about, and how we can help. So again, thank you all and have a great, wonderful rest of your day. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.